Hello, and welcome to the webinar, Making Sense of the AI Hype in Finance. My name is Eric Wallace with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, then we'll dig into our discussion. First, we'd like to thank Oracle for their partnership with today's event. They've been wonderful thought leadership partners to Argyle, and they're committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. Thank you again to Oracle. We appreciate you joining us today. We welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are on social media, please use the hashtag #ArgyleDigital and follow us at Argyle Exec Forum. Also, please keep an eye on LinkedIn for special announcements. I also wanted to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. Argyle is very proud and protective of this policy, as it reflects our commitment to ensure the neutrality and overall value of the content presented at our events. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. For those of you who are seeking CPE credit today, you must answer at least 3 polling questions and remain on the session for its duration. Polls can be found under the Polls tab on the right-hand side of your console, right next to Chat. Afterwards, if you're eligible to receive credit, you will receive an email with a link to your certificates. If you have any questions about credits, please email cpe@argyleforum.com. Finally, and most importantly, please submit all questions that come up during today's event into the chat section of the interface. Before we start, we'll have our speakers introduce themselves, and then we'll begin our discussion. Wayne, over to you.
Hi, thank you very much. So welcome everybody to this session hosted by Argyle. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about making sense in finance, what the hype is all about, and what it really means for finance professionals like you. So what we've decided, instead of going through a full slide deck and speaking at you for an hour, we'll make it more of a dialogue supported by slides. So with me, I'd like to introduce the other 2 speakers. First, my name is Wayne Heather. I work in EPM product marketing at Oracle, looking after the EPM suite. Mark, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yes, hello everyone. Mark Seawald. I'm in the Oracle Product Development Organization. So I'm a part of the team that builds software here at Oracle, specifically in EPM product management, targeting software for FP&A organizations, planning, budgeting, forecasting, things of that nature.
Thank you, Mark. Welcome. And Eric.
I'll introduce myself. Sorry. Eric Kanoin. I work in finance. We're all so excited about this session that I couldn't wait to start talking. But yeah, we're really this is a great topic. I'm really glad that all of you are here and looking forward to walking through it with you.
Thanks, Eric. So I guess just to set the scene a little bit, the main theme that we hear nowadays when talking to customers is AI, but just a little bit about generational change in business and technology and how we've got there. So I can remember the first wave that really kind of brought the internet to the forefront, I guess, was e-commerce. That was in the early 2000s when e-commerce became very, very prevalent. And then things like travel and entertainment bookings on Expedia, Booking.com became the norm, moving away from travel agents. And then Facebook and Twitter, social media, the rise of social media came along, and also the launch of the iPhone mobile became, more prevalent in terms of smartphones. They became the de facto standard. With that brought sensors and geolocation, and then autonomous vehicles. The first, I know DARPA ran a big competition in the early 2000s to try and get people inventing or looking at autonomous vehicles, and then Uber and those guys and Tesla took over. Also with IoT, a proliferation of data started where people are collecting data on all kinds of devices. Ride sharing came with Uber, and then VR became a big thing with Oculus Rift, gaming, and then also commercial use cases. And nowadays, you can't go to a website without having some sort of bot try and chat to you or recommend something. Cryptocurrency snuck in, and that was around to displace fiat currency, as it were. Virtual assistants with Amazon Alexa and the Google equivalent just became the norm. But I think what's really, really become of age nowadays is machine learning, specifically AI. And I think the reason for that, and Mark, Eric, you can confirm, but I think it's basically, there's proliferation of data. compute and storage costs have come down, and cloud has just made it really, really easy for people to start playing in that technology. And kind of OpenAI has definitely demonstrated that and brought ChatGPT to the forefront of every conversation.
Yeah, Wayne, I mean, just for my part, just to add a comment on that, I think although you put AI and machine learning there at the end, like a lot of those technologies, the development of these things have been happening for quite some time. We may just be thinking a lot about AI right now, but it's been around for a lot, quite some time. And I know you're going to talk about that here coming up.
Yeah. And I think an interesting point there, Mark, is that as these technologies have been coming about, people have just started consuming them in their everyday life. I mentioned Amazon Alexa. A lot of people have smart homes where you turn your lights on, turn your heating on, etc., just by talking to a machine. And then you get things like, if I watch television, a streaming service like Netflix or Hulu or Disney Plus, whatever, they know what shows I like, they know what shows I'm interested in. And then there's things like self-driving cars, virtual assistants, all of that stuff, I guess, has become prevalent in terms of the way we use it today. And the interesting thing is we just have adopted it. We haven't had to have any sort of education. It's just something new. We pick it up and we start using it. I think you also see that nowadays in work, where a lot of people have started using AI in what they do, or without really knowing it, I'd say. There's a lot of things like next best offer for customers. If you're using ERP, they understand your payment terms and which customer, which are the things to recommend to the customers. If you look at HCM, recruiting best candidates, I mean, AI does a lot of that nowadays. I'm sure everybody's aware, scan CVs and recommends the best candidates to be hired. There's fraud detection in banks. I'm sure we've all got a call from the bank or an email saying this is a suspicious transaction. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but just that stuff all happens in the background. How do you see that playing out in kind of work today, Mark?
Yeah, I think, clearly we've been experiencing these technologies and AI, as you've talked about, for years. And there is that expectation that we should have that same kind of experience at work, whether we're in finance or whether in operations or a different part of the business. But, clearly in finance, why can't technology help automate things the way it's automated my personal life, using tools like you've just described? The analogy I like to use is Google Maps. Google Maps was really kind of changed things very dramatically for people, and to the point that you talked about. You didn't have to take any kind of training to use Google Maps. You just type in the address where you want to go and you're off and running. But it, behind the scenes, uses a lot of AI and data to not just help you get where you're going, but also reroute you if there's a problem. And that's the exact expectation that I think we have in finance and other parts of the enterprise is that, why are we spending hours every day or, tens of hours or hundreds of hours week after week working spreadsheets and doing manual, tedious type activities? In a lot of cases, people in finance are very highly skilled, but yet they're spending all this time on these kind of low valued activities. So in the context of finance, kind of the expectations are, hey, if I'm in a financial close process, why shouldn't I be alerted to, a potential problem? Automatically, I shouldn't have to be thinking about it or looking for problems. Those problems should be brought right to me, and whether it's a data problem or a process problem, things like that. If my responsibility is in accounting and I need to do account reconciliations, why am I doing these very manual, repetitive account reconciliations? Can't a lot of these things be automated through things like AI? And, in the world that I operate in a lot, and I know Eric operates in a lot, FP&A, hey, forecasting of using algorithms and data science has been around for, quite some time. Can't we improve the accuracy and, equally as important, sometimes the speed of our forecasting and planning and budgeting through the use of some of these technologies? So it's absolutely the expectation, and it's up to software vendors like us here at Oracle to help deliver on that, but that's absolutely the expectation.
And if I could add to that, I think Mark explained it incredibly well. I would say this relatively recent hype, if you will, around OpenAI has really given us kind of an open door with our teams to have the discussions Mark just described, right? So why is it just in my personal life? Why is it only working here? And what we're seeing is far more use cases being brought up of can we do this, can we do that than we did before. So I think it's creating a great ecosystem of, hey, here's additional functionality that we want to have and need to have that would be helpful so that we can make sure that we meet that need across the industry. So I think it's an exciting time, but it's all this hype. It's not just hype. It's really kind of creating real world use cases as well.
Exactly.
That's fantastic. And it's interesting to hear that it is now opening up more opportunities in finance as well. So I guess sticking on the theme of AI, let's just talk a little bit about. I know we're going to get into a little more detail later about how we help finance users, but let's just discuss. ChatGPT's come out recently and really sparked the imagination, like you said, Eric, even of your finance team. But let's be clear on AI. It's been around for a while, and what's the differences between, the AI that's been around for a while and the new buzz, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in on that. There, obviously, welcome Eric's thoughts here as well. But the world did change here in the last year. ChatGPT, although this kind of technology, this generative AI technology, like ChatGPT, has been around for a while, it really didn't get brought to the attention of the casual consumer or the casual business person until about November of last year when they announced this. And it's really turned the world and turned finance and turned the enterprise on its head to the point that Eric was just making. The art of the possible seems possible. So much more seems possible. It's so much more approachable. And this slide I think does a good job, because we need to understand that AI is not new. AI, to the point I made earlier, has been around for a very long time. Not just we here at Oracle, but many organizations have been working on AI and putting AI into financial software, or putting AI into operational or supply chain software, things of that nature. And we would generally call that traditional AI, or maybe classic AI. Those are things like making predictions or spotting patterns in data, or automating processes, things of that nature. But what's super exciting about this new generative AI is it dramatically lowers the threshold for entry. Honestly, a child can use generative AI. Anybody can go and type into a chat screen and start asking questions. And maybe the responses are generally accurate, maybe they're not always accurate, but anybody can start to do it. So what's really exciting and really captures the imagination, I think, is when you combine these two together. Generative AI is not going to solve all the problems out there. It's a great interface to things, but it's when you combine that together with traditional AI, I think we're really going to start to see a hockey stick of kind of how we can dramatically change things in the enterprise.
Okay. That's awesome. But at the end of the day, if you look at ChatGPT, it brings a lot of things to the imagination. But if you look at finance as an office, or the Office of Finance, have the problems changed? So Eric, in terms of kind of what you're seeing, sometimes there's a new shiny object that's arrived and people go around looking for problems to solve with this shiny object. How do you see this in finance? Kind of the people, process, technology? Are you still facing the same challenges you had of ages ago, or not really?
Yeah, I think it's a yes to a degree, right? So I think a lot of the problems are consistent and the challenges are consistent. I think the speed at which we're expected to operate has increased dramatically. And I think the level of data available to us has also increased dramatically. So if you look at kind of the fundamental problems we've had historically as a function, it's been, hey, do you have clean master data? Kind of a garbage in, garbage out scenario. Are you able to close your books in a clean, easy way? And there's kind of this foundational element of what happens in finance, just making sure, at your core, you have accurate reporting of the financial results, right? That's kind of a basic. So that the challenge of that, depending on the company, how many acquisitions you've been through, the level of complexity that you're managing, those kinds of things. I think the core objective of the finance function, in my mind at least, is how can we provide value to the business? And that's where this is solving things for us in a way that the previous technology did not. In other words, you have to have a strong foundation. You want to automate and simplify that foundational layer of work in the finance function, as Mark was describing, in as clean a way as you can, right, to get that out of the way. And then really what we're looking to do now is add more value from a business conversation perspective. Are we identifying things that the business hasn't even thought of? Are we doing things that provide greater value? And I think the benefit of using this technology is finance in most companies has a unique lens in the sense that they have a kind of a full view of the entire company's results by line of business, et cetera. And so it gives the function an opportunity to provide additional value. So I'd say, to kind of sum up that question, the fundamental issues are the same, but the quantity of data that we're dealing with and the pace at which we have to operate has really increased significantly.
So you mentioned, if I can pick up on that, you mentioned the quantity of data and the speed that you expected to operate at. Do you see, and we'll probably cover this a little more, but do you see this technology fundamentally helping finance address some of those challenges or problems?
Absolutely. Let me give you kind of a use case to maybe bring the point home a bit. So historically, in a finance function, let's say you're doing a OpEx forecast, operating expense for your company, right? And there's various ways to do that by geography, globally, line of business, et cetera. But historically, you would go in and do it in an Excel spreadsheet, candidly, right? And then we got a little bit more mature and said, hey, we can actually automate some of that, get cleaner processes, et cetera, and that helped. But now with the advent of new technology capability, we're able to go in and do a lot more modeling holistically. So as Mark was describing earlier, things that we had kind of preconceived biases and notions that were sometimes true, sometimes not. Hey, headcount's the key driver of expense. Sure. What's the mix of headcount? How expensive are they? What region? Those kinds of things. But now with the advent of this new technology, we're able to kind of do much more advanced scenario modeling across an entire company, to the point where, a fun word we use in finance sometimes is, there's always a sandbagger somewhere in your organization, right? Someone who pads their forecast or what have you. And what we're able to do now is really identify areas that we know are going to be more accurate through using the technology than relying upon a human, if you will, to put in kind of manually a forecast. So I think, Wayne, that's one of the use cases where we're using this much more aggressively, and it's really proven to give us a much more reliable forecast process.
Okay. And Mark, I know you speak to a lot of customers as well. Just looking at that slide, as I call it, the planning maturity curve, where do you see customers fitting in today? Are a lot of them on the mature side, or they're still moving?
Yeah, actually, Wayne, before I get into this slide, I want to add on a comment onto what Eric said and kind of your question you posed to Eric about kind of the volume of data. I think it's a losing battle we're fighting in finance. Organizations are getting more and more data, but at the same time, finance headcount is not keeping up with that explosion of data. So in the example that Eric talked about, he was talking about expenses. Now there's things like IoT data that maybe helps you do predictive forecasts on your maintenance expense, things like that. If you were to try to do that manually, it's a losing equation. So really the only way to keep up with that is through the use of technology, because headcount's not going to keep growing as the data grows. But that's precisely really kind of a great segue into the slide that you put up here. Is I've been in the space for quite some time. Embarrassing to admit that probably the mid '90s is when I came into this space and working with FP&A teams and planning and forecasting. And back in the mid '90s, driver-based planning was considered modern. And you talk to a lot of organizations today, and they're still in the process of doing driver-based planning or historical trend-based planning. But there's so much more technology that's available to you out there. I know a lot of organizations may be a little intimidated to adopt some of these technologies. I think that's probably one of the biggest obstacles or hurdles to it, is just this perceived lack of skill or a lack of understanding around it. But the technology exists. So when you look at a continuum like this, of course we can continue to do manual forecasts. Of course we can continue to draft driver-based planning or forecasting. But to the point that Eric made, those tend to have things like bias in it, and they tend to be very manual still. You can automate it to a certain extent, but there's still going to be a degree of, everybody needs to go in and put a lot of thought into this and manually enter a lot of data. Those things can be more automated. Maybe not even automated in a place in a way that replaces a driver-based forecast. Maybe you still want to trust that driver-based forecast, but maybe you can use statistical forecasting or machine learning to augment that, to help, okay, this is what the machine's saying, and this is what our human-based forecast is saying. What's the explanation for the gap? Sometimes the humans are going to be more accurate, quite frankly, because we have knowledge of things that the machines might not. But the machines are based on historical data, so the machines can don't take things like bias into consideration or don't inject bias into the forecasting the way sometimes humans do. So it's a huge opportunity. I do think that a lot of finance organizations are on this journey towards machine learning based predictions. But I think there's a lot of work still to be done out there. Eric, I certainly welcome your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think you explained that really well. And I'll give an example to the last point you were making, which is, hey, does the machine do everything, right? So if you go back to the COVID dynamic, if you were in a supply chain dependent business pre-COVID, that was an external shock to the system that the machine may not have predicted, right? So I think what this does, though, is you get kind of all your regular business activity in a really clean format in terms of how you do your analysis, right? And so a lot of that kind of blocking and tackling that you previously had to do, you saved a tremendous amount of time. And what it allows people to do is it allows them to respond to external shocks like manufacturing disruption, et cetera, like we experienced a few years ago, and get in front of that. And then then the model is trained to accommodate the new reality over time, right? So it becomes part of your process. So, we went through that internally, obviously dealing with all the manufacturing shocks and how to adjust to those, how to react, et cetera. But having the foundation is super, super helpful. I'd also say, and Mark alluded to this, there is a bit of fear involved in this, right? So it's, hey, I've been doing my process for the last 10 years. It works. I'm highly regarded. And the other issue is we have many folks, I think, in a variety of organizations who tribal knowledge is their value prop for employment. So you have to attack that and help folks understand, hey, look, that may have been the case yesterday, but that's not going to be the case in 5 years. So do yourself a favor and the company as well by migrating to the new reality. And that can be a hard adjustment, right? But I think the best way to do it is to show the value of going to the new model. And like Mark said, you can compare and contrast it to your existing process for a bit before you go cold turkey. But really, it's kind of a forcing function to move faster.
That's exactly right. One other thing I'll add, and I know we're probably spending too much time on this one slide, but I love this slide. And, I think just the fear is the driver of in a lot of cases. People think that, oh my gosh, machine learning is for data scientists or software engineers, and that's not the case. Really, a finance person can look at a machine-based forecast versus another version of the forecast and tell where there's differences. You don't necessarily need to be a data scientist to start working with these kind of technologies. So again, some of these perceived obstacles are exactly that. They're perceived. They're not necessarily the reality.
That's a good point, Mark, and it might lead me onto the next question I'm going to ask you. But before I ask you a question, let's ask the audience where they see themselves in terms of their journey on, let's call it the maturity curve of planning. So if we can have the audience answer the poll questions, would be great.
And while that's happening there, Wayne, I saw a question come in about other areas outside of finance, like recruiting, and I think this absolutely applies to all parts of the enterprise. I think obviously in our presentation here, we'll probably focus a little bit more on the finance side and maybe more on FP&A. But it's relevant across the board, and I think actually you really shouldn't think of these things in silos. You shouldn't think of AI for HR and AI for finance. At the end of the day, the benefit of this is that it can all be connected together. So so great question. Thank you for that question.
Good point. Okay, so it looks like we got a few answers, and driver-based and historical trends seems to be where a lot of people are at the moment, and it's not surprised there's still quite a few people doing manual forecasting on spreadsheets. The interesting thing is there is a people that are looking at machine learning and predictions, which is quite interesting.
If I could jump in on this one, this is very consistent with what we've seen in other forums. And so I think one of the benefits of participating in something like this is it makes you realize you're not alone, right? So that sometimes I've gone to some of these meetings and customers are afraid to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm still doing everything in Excel. You're not alone in that, right? I think the good thing is there's a lot of opportunity to kind of think through the continuum and what you can do to improve moving forward. So I think it's really a positive story for the 12 folks that were in the manual mode. As frustrating as that can be, it's really an opportunity as well. and you're definitely not isolated in that problem.
Yeah, and I'll talk about the other end of the spectrum there. I think it's pretty interesting. If you just group those last two, statistical forecasting and simulations, together with the machine learning and predictions, yeah, that's about 15% of respondents, and that anecdotally is actually consistent with what I think anecdotally we have conversations with customers. We see about 15 to 20% of the customers starting to really deploy these kind of technologies into production. And we see even a larger percentage, testing them out, playing with them right now. But it's pretty interesting coincidence that that number landed right about at about 15% for customers that have already started to move these into production. So good to see that.
Interesting. So I guess on that theme, Mark, talking about moving into using technology and stuff, you're a technologist at Oracle, and you're about delivering technology for our customers, but it's not just about the technology. It's the things you look at are how you can improve the life of the customers. Am I correct? Can you comment a little bit on how you see native machine learning for finance in the applications you deliver and some of the things you're thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's a no-brainer. I alluded to it at the beginning, and when I first started speaking, we in finance or any part of the enterprise, but certainly in finance, you're skilled people. You really want to be able to do what high value type activity. It can be pretty frustrating when you're spending 30, 40, 50% of your day manipulating data in spreadsheets, or whether you're ticking and tying numbers that just over and over again every month. Can you be doing some more value added work? I think we all want to be doing that, regardless of what our function is, right? Get the monotony out and focus on the things where you really can be adding value. So, on the screen right now, it talks about some of these areas. You can slice and dice this a number of different ways, but this breaks it down by, automation, going for more of a touchless operations. Sometimes that can be done even without the benefit of AI, but AI is certainly a great enabler of that. Why am I rekeying in data here that might exist in another system? Or, hey, can I use something like robotic process automation to connect a process in a more automated way? And, a lot of companies have started down that journey to using robotic process automation, but that's only part of it. You're really just scratching the surface. Really, I think I'll talk maybe about the third one next. Is that kind of the predictions? Clearly, as your data in finance starts to grow, it's such a huge opportunity for predictive technologies. There's no reason that a finance person needs to be spending hours and hours combing through data, looking for tiny little anomalies in the data, or variances, or trends, or correlations. Why can't some of these things be automated? Why can't the software create a prediction for me? And that really leads me to the second point here, is around the recommendations. I don't think anybody is suggesting that this is taking humans out of the loop. I think the technology is not quite there. This is really a partnership between technology and human activity, where the machines can help augment decision making. It can give you good recommended actions, but at the end of the day, it's still the human that's got to make that decision. So in the example I gave earlier, where a lot of companies will use predictive forecasts to compare to their traditional forecast. Now, again, there could be some very good reasons. Maybe if you're opening a new plant or you're launching a new campaign, that won't show up in your historical data. So that's really where that human analysis needs to still really play a really important picture. But when it's just looking at the historical data and trying to figure out whether that's consistent with what's happening right now or what's happening a month or two from now, absolutely the technology can be helping with that and recommending, creating some recommended paths for you. So again, you could go in 1,000 different directions with this topic, but with these three ways of breaking it down, I think are effective.
That's quite interesting. It just reminds me of the point Eric made earlier on, where I think if you combine the human knowledge with this, you can identify things that have not been thought of yet or identified. So opportunities, I guess, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and if I could add one thing, I think Mark explained that really well. I think there's the sanity check, if you will, that someone has to be close enough to the business, understand it, et cetera, to tease out the data that you're getting back. That's clearly the case. I think the other element is it creates some excitement as a finance professional, because your job goes from being more of a number cruncher to an influencer, right? So you're taking that data set that you have, the insight that you've gathered, and you're figuring out with your team, how do I then present this to a senior executive with a bias for action? How do we actually take this information and drive behavior change with it? So it's a bit of that validation that Mark described, but it's also creating a need for some new skill sets in some cases of how do we better influence, because now we can get faster to that influencing conversation. And to me, that's very exciting. That's what everybody wants to be doing. So
Right.
it's kind of a pathway for that.
Exactly.
Well, that's really interesting. So I think I'm going to turn the conversation a little bit now about, that how. So we've had a discussion. AI in finance, is it just hype? I would say no. From what I've heard from both of you, it is going to become reality, or is reality in some aspects. Just in terms of the two, we spoke a little bit about what generative AI is. I know you've spoken about ChatGPT, where it can generate a whole bunch of things. But Mark, you mentioned marrying generative AI and traditional AI. What are some of the use cases that you're seeing in finance that are kind of where they can work either together or separately, or what's the difference?
Yeah, again, I stole a little bit of the thunder there when I spoke earlier about this, but I think generative AI has obviously captures the imagination of everybody in the last year, but I think also maybe there's been a little bit of hyper exuberance around this and thinking that generative AI, solves all the problems, and it's not. Generative AI is supported by a technology called large language models. It focuses on things like language, so it creates this new interface that I talked about, this new way of interacting with technology, but it doesn't solve all the things. You're still very likely going to be relying on the traditional or classic AI to do some of the more number crunching type activity. So I like this slide that you have here, Wayne, because I think it's appropriate. Obviously, we put a little thought into that slide. You can think of it as almost like a left brain and a right brain kind of analogy. Generative AI is that right brain, and it's really focused on things like intuition and understanding and semantic understanding of what needs to be done. But when it comes to the left brain, that's really the quantitative side of the brain, and that's really where traditional AI comes into play. And ultimately, it's the interaction of the two. And that's why actually right now you see all kinds of amazing novel things coming out of tools like ChatGPT. Like you can write poetry and you can do all these pretty cool things, but it's been a little slower to see some of the adoption yet in the enterprise. Certainly we're starting to see it come into the enterprise already here at Oracle and other places. But it's a little slower because we got to marry that up with some of the traditional AI to be able to really deliver what customers and users expect from an enterprise standpoint. Connect that intuition to the logical side of the data.
Right. Fantastic. Thanks, Mark. So I know Oracle's done a lot of thought leadership and innovation around this, and embedded a lot into the FP&A processes within EPM. Can you share a few good examples or a few things that we've delivered or you've delivered, and how it's helping some of our customers?
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the things I'm very passionate about that I believe is a huge opportunity for finance is automating data analysis. Quite frankly, if you think about business process and finance, so much of our time is spent on data analysis. Every month, of course, you have to close the books every month, every quarter, every year, and of course, we need to develop the forecast, and maybe we use predictions to help us develop the forecast. But at the end of the day, a significant part of everybody's time in finance, and even beyond finance, is spent analyzing data. And if you think about what it is they do, you're looking for patterns in the data. But it's not just any pattern. Particularly when you're in finance, these patterns are very specific. You're looking for things like variances. You're looking for things like trends. You're looking for things like correlation. You're looking for things like anomalies. These things can be automated. The pattern detection has been around for quite some time. Quite frankly, pattern detection is effectively what helps driverless cars become autonomous. They're looking for patterns on the road. But you know what? Thank goodness, I don't want to have to worry about pattern detection on the road. I can tell you, looking for things like trends and anomalies and variances is a whole lot easier. So really using AI to spot simple patterns in your data can greatly reduce the amount of time you spend in data analysis. Why spend hours and hours and hours, if not days, doing data analysis when an algorithm can find things like that in a matter of seconds or minutes? So that's really precisely what what we'll show you here in the next couple of slides. This is reality. It exists today. This is something that can help finance organizations today. Is looking at historical data like a forecast variance compared to actuals, and actually calculating things like bias. As alluded to by Eric, I don't think I've ever talked to a finance organization that doesn't believe there's some degree of upside or downside bias in your plans and forecasts and budgets. And you know what, that can be quantified. Instead of letting, just working on hunches and tribal kind of history, let the software actually calculate some of this for you. It allows you to have a little bit more of an objective discussion with the people that are submitting forecasts to you. So, hey, I see that you've got a pretty significant you've historically had some bias here in the last year. Previous to that, maybe you can see your forecasts were pretty consistent, but lately it's become a little skewed. Is there something going on in the business that I should have a better understanding about? And that's what this insight is showing you. It's showing you that an algorithm can help you find these patterns for you. And if we go on another one, we'll give you 3 different examples. This is the second example. We talked about this a little bit. Eric and myself both alluded to it. But when you think about how do you use AI together with your human intuition, you don't necessarily need to get rid of your driver-based planning, but use your driver-based planning together with predictive plans or predictive forecasts. And this is an example where you can be using algorithms to automatically find variances between your prediction and your forecast. So why spend, you might think, oh my gosh, that's one more variance report I need to do. But no, that's not one more variance report. You should be throwing away all your variance reports, quite frankly, because the algorithms can find those variances for you very quickly. And in this example, you can see here, it's looking at variances between your forecast and your plan, and as well as your prediction. So it's, again, highlighting those important differences. Again, a great way to get rid of, spend a lot less time sorting through data. The last one is the anomaly, and this is a very simplified example of anomaly. But you might think anomaly is easy to spot in data. Anybody can bring up a dashboard and see a big spike up or spike down in your numbers. But this is a very simple example. Anomaly can actually be very hard to spot for the human eye in certain scenarios, particularly when you're looking at data that has a lot of volatility, a lot of up and down, or maybe a lot of seasonality or a certain trend. When there's a lot of seasonality or trend in that data, it's hard for the human eye to spot what is truly an anomaly. And again, a perfect example of how algorithms can do that for you. So, and I know in certain industries, algorithms have been used to spot anomalies, and in grocery store chains typically will do a lot of anomaly detection in how products are moving off their shelves. They want to be aware of when things are very different patterns than what they may have been historically. But this kind of concept can apply all up and down the income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow. Looking for anomalies, looking for variances, all that can be automated.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Mark. And just if I expand on that, so this is looking at kind of almost, as you say, analyzing data in FP&A. Eric alluded to it earlier on around the data explosion, and so did you, saying there's more data. So how does finance consider more data within their decisions? I mean, even if it's forecasting, look outside your ERP, for example, cash flow forecasting. How would you do that?
Yeah, so we've deployed this in a variety of different areas, to your point about data. I would say it goes back to my earlier comment around kind of there's a foundational level of task you have to do. And candidly, you want to spend as little time as possible on repetitive tasks, as we've been talking about throughout this conversation. And so like the slide you're showing here speaks to some of that, right? So we're heavily invested in how do we minimize any touch point or manual interaction on pretty much any of the things you have there on the left-hand column. How can we do that in as automated a way as possible? Because by doing that, you take away the data proliferation problem, right? Mm-hmm. So you can scale a technology and a process against kind of almost an infinite amount of data, so to speak, if you're not having to manually interact with it. So really, that's what, we really took an attempt at. You have to, first of all, know what you're doing. You have to define your processes very, very clearly to know what you're up against and what you're trying to solve for. And then if you can deploy the technology effectively for each of these areas that you see there on the left, it really allows you to not have to worry as much, Wayne, about the data proliferation problem, because you've automated things, it's simplified, it's in a defined process. So if your business grows, 100x from one year to the next, it scale because you already have it integrated in your process. I think to me, that's the biggest benefit of all this. And I think, Mark, you summarized it very well earlier. It's really a forcing function. If you don't do it this way, you flat out, everything breaks, right? You just cannot keep up with the amount of data and analysis that you're being asked to provide. And then one other comment, you didn't ask this question, but I was thinking about it as Mark was talking. One of the questions I get a lot from customers is, hey, this is all great, but I work with a business partner who wants to own his forecast. So yeah, I could put everything in a system, I could click a button, it'd be 10 times more accurate than our current forecast is, but person X won't allow that to happen, right? So how do I deal with the behavioral challenge on that side? And I think the beauty of that question is it's hard to argue with data, right? So no matter how difficult a personality or individual you might be dealing with, or how set in their ways they happen to be, if you institute all this, you have data that's really hard to argue with, right? And you can show over time how to get more accurate. And it really changes the conversation. It's not an argument. It's actually a conversation based upon valid information that you can help use to grow the business. So I think that's a common question I get. I thought I wanted to put that out there before I forgot.
Yeah, I love that point, Eric. Actually, I mean, it's about bringing more objectivity to our job in finance and working with our business partners. Less subjectivity. It should be less emotion. It should be more, hey, these are the facts. How can we benefit from it? Great point. And I know, Wayne, you wanted me to speak to this slide here, and I think this is just like the preceding slides. It's a good example of how technology can help, or AI can help. It may not be obvious from the title there, but over on the right hand side there, you can see that this is a cash forecast actually. So virtually any enterprise out there, obviously with the interest rates the way it is right now, cash forecasting is of interest to a lot of people. And you'll see there you're forecasting things like cash inflows, like coming from customer invoices or orders or subscriptions, things like that. Cash outflows like salary payments, blah blah blah. A lot of organizations do that manually today, but that's a good example of a business process that's so ripe for AI, because there's a lot of data that supports that. Over on the left-hand side of the screen, all of that data that sits in subledgers in your financial systems can actually be used to drive predictions of your cash forecast. It's just such a huge opportunity, and it's just a great example of we talked about data explosion, but this is a great example. There's a wealth of knowledge about your business in these subledgers. Can you leverage that knowledge? And the answer is yes. AI helps you do that.
That's fantastic. So actually what I want to do is just change a little bit, and I'm going to skip forward to a slide over here and pick up on something Eric said, which was, Eric, it's kind of like you've got to move with the wave. You mentioned, when you've got a challenge, like someone wants to own their forecast. What are the concerns you see as finance when you're looking at adopting AI, which into business? I mean, there's got to be things like governance and stuff like that. So how do you see these challenges?
Yeah, I think this slide does a good job of articulating some of that, right? Of how this is approached and how we look at it. Technology for technology's sake hasn't solved anybody's problem. You have to understand what solution you're looking to solve for and really be specific about what you're going after. So I think that's one key element. But what you touched on was the data security concern. And I think particularly in finance, that's one of the top concerns, right? So you can't go out. I mean, very few companies are letting ChatGPT be deployed at an enterprise level from a security perspective, right? Because you can't control, so to speak, what happens. And so I think that's one key concern. That's why I think, having a clear enterprise software solution with the right level of security safeguards, that allows you to more easily deploy and get sponsorship and buy-in candidly to go off and take something like this on. That's when we talk to customers, that's probably one of the number one concerns. And, particularly customers that are global or operate globally, Western Europe, constantly changing regulatory environment, not just there, of course, right? But, another day goes by, there's another new security concern or governance element that's brought up. And so I think our ability to be very, very clean on data security is super, super helpful. And I think this last point is super critical, and we've alluded to it before, but, the humans in your organization are still in the driver's seat. They're ultimately accountable, right? The computer is not signing off on the financial statements in a given quarter. As nice as that would be, right? That's not happening from a regulatory perspective. And so, you have to understand what you're implementing, how you're implementing it, what is your data security strategy holistically, and then just ensure that everybody's on board with that approach. And that's why having a clean framework to follow, I think, is really, really helpful.
Fantastic. Eric, I want you to continue on that, talking a little bit about, the key concerns and opportunities. But before you do, let's just poll the audience and see, what are their main concerns around AI? Is it, like you said, a solution, not technology? What about hallucinations or other AI things that are weird? Enterprise security of data, I guess, and then also, are the humans still in driver's seat? So, interesting just to get a poll over there. Yeah, the interesting thing is humans being in the driver's seat is getting a lot of responses, 58%, which is
human in the loop. People aren't quite ready to completely let the AI work independently, which obviously makes sense.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks. So, Eric, if you can just carry on in the theme of kind of what you're seeing in the key concerns and opportunities in your day-to-day role and your team and the customers you talk to.
Yeah, I think for me, and I'm going to speak more to the behavioral side, because to me, that's a critically important part of this. Mm-hmm. And you can see on the left-hand concerns that you've highlighted here, a lot of this is behavioral. So, everybody rightfully asks, what does this mean for me? Right? If I've been doing something for quite some time, as I talked about earlier, this can potentially be a threat. So you're messing up my world. I don't want to migrate, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, when we started on our journey internally, I had thought we were fully deployed on a level of automation that we put out there, and it worked well. We'd taken all the feedback into account, and I'll be totally transparent and open here. A year after I thought we were done, I uncovered 3 or 4 areas where folks were still using their 15-year-old spreadsheet process in parallel, right? And so I'm mentioning that to say that it's I think it's just a natural human condition, if you will, to be a little bit afraid of change. But I think that's something you have to get through. And so I think just making sure that that's really well understood. I think we're also realizing that it requires a different set of skills, right? So if you hired an organization that is very good at repetitive tasks, reconciliations, things of that nature, and you automate a significant percentage of that, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily taking jobs out, but you're changing what you want folks to focus on. And I think the question is, are folks able to make that step? And so I think, to me, it's really important in any kind of transformation strategy or discussion to ensure that that's really well articulated up front in a careful and thoughtful way, so that employees can get behind, hey, wait a minute, everybody wants to be relevant. No one wants to be irrelevant 10 years down the line. I haven't met anybody who has that as a goal. But I think you have to give some vision casting to help folks understand the journey that you're on, what it means, and the types of skills we're looking to build moving forward, because I think that's critically important. So that's one thing I just wanted to call out. And I think this right-hand side, showing the opportunities, is a way to have that conversation, right? So, hey, Susie, you've been doing a lot of work and you do a great job. You're the best we have, but everybody's human and we still make mistakes, and you're spending 80% of your time, doing manual reconciliations. Guess what? If we move to this new process, here's the path that we can be on. We're going to eliminate that issue, and you're going to have a great opportunity to do these 3 or 4 things that you need and want to grow in, right? So I think it's the way in which we have that conversation. And then lastly, I'll let Mark chime in, of course, but not to belabor the slide, but I think there really are compelling reasons to change, right? This isn't like pie in the sky theoretical stuff. These are tangible impacts that we see when we migrate to ML and AI and institute it across the enterprise. So I'll do one last example, and then I'll be quiet here. But we had really well-founded, we thought, theories on pipeline conversion and what drove various degrees of sales pipeline to convert at a certain rate. And through using new technology, some of what we thought was correct. Candidly, some things we had thought for many years were flat out wrong, and we were proven wrong. So I think getting that insight can be incredibly valuable. And the more of those examples you see, it's really a great amplification of why this is such a compelling thing to do as an organization.
I don't have much to add. I mean, that was excellent, Eric. I love how you focused on the human side of AI. That's fantastic.
Yeah. I think you've covered off most of this, Eric, unless you want to add a little more on scenario modeling.
Yeah, this is just another example, right, of kind of a use case or application for it. And I think I'll spend maybe 30 seconds on it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before, we might take a really long time to turn around and forecast scenario. This is becoming a really compelling tool for a lot of companies. You don't have 3 weeks to say, hey, what if we did this? What would that look like? We're trying to do a real-time conversation, perhaps even in a boardroom of, hey, what if we go to option B? What would that look like? So to be able to run scenarios very, very quickly and accurately is becoming super, super helpful. So this is just another example of how to deploy the technology.
Fantastic. I guess then we'll move on. The interesting thing is, with the feedback of the last poll, how humans are still a little wary of Gen AI and stuff like that. And we've spoken about the security concerns of data and the fact that it generates stuff unlike the old AI, which is more analytical. It's called Gen AI, creative AI. What are some of the use cases that you identifying, Mark, in terms of what you guys are doing?
Yeah, great question. So as we alluded to, generative AI is super, super exciting, but you have to be very focused on the use cases that are going to be appropriate based on where we are with the technology right now. The technology is amazing. Large language models are amazing at understanding intent, the intuition, the right side of the brain. But again, it's marrying it up with that logical side of it. So we, ultimately, where we would love to be able to go with this technology, and we're not too far off with it right now, is doing things like, having a conversation with your data. The first bullet talks about management reporting narrative. Hey, we've done analysis, or maybe the algorithms have found some issues with the data, or some variances, or some trends, or some anomalies. Now help me prepare the report that I need to do with in my management package that I need to report to the board or need to report to the executives. That's a lot of time. That it takes time to describe in words what you're seeing in a report. Generally, when you're preparing these packages for your executives, they're not just a dashboard, or it's not just a chart or a graph. You want to accompany that with some level of explanation. So we think that the use of narrative technology is excellent, or of generative AI is excellent to be able to help you build these reporting packages and explain the narrative that needs to accompany these reporting packages. So I think that takes us to our final part here, is the actual demonstration. So is that correct? The demonstration is next? Keeping an eye on the time here. So let me just set up the demo before we get into it. We're going to give you a little bit of a demonstration of some of the capability we're working on. And that is specifically in how can you use a large language model or generative AI to interrogate your data and prepare a management report. So the scenario that I'll do is I'm going to play the role of somebody in finance who needs to prepare a quarterly reporting package. And I'm going to look at some of the insights that I found in the data, and I'm going to add one of these insights into my management package. So in this case, it'll be an auto manufacturer that maybe had a little bit of an issue in the supply chain. So with that, Wayne, why don't we roll the demo, and I'll talk to it. So here I am preparing the report. I've logged into the system. You can see here that I need to build that report. On the right-hand side of the page, you can see that I've got an insight. There's been a battery shortage of 15,000 units, and I want to add that problem that I found in this quarterly reporting to my management report. You'll see here, I've just added a new section, but instead of authoring this myself, I'm going to use generative AI to do this. I'm going to say, okay, make this section about the supply chain, But I'm just going to drag and drop that insight into my report here. So it's going to, in addition to obviously adding a title, it's going to give me a verbal explanation of what that insight is. So I don't have to author that myself. So you can see that the the Q3 shortage there on the data. So that's great. That's helpful. But I want some more information. One of the suppliers is how we're going to kind of make up for this shortage in batteries. Megatech's one of these suppliers. So add a little comment on what we're doing with Megatech, and yep, sure enough, there it goes. It adds another paragraph of detail, so I don't have to author it. The large language model knows what's going on with my data. Last but not least, of course, I don't want to just have narrative. I want to be able to visualize this as well. So I can ask the large language model to also come out and generate a graph or a chart. And maybe I want to make a change to that graph or chart. But here you can see the third bar chart. You can see there's a shortage of 15,000 batteries. But on the right-hand side, in Q4, we really expect to overcome that. And then in addition to that, as I scroll to the top of the screen here, you can see that it's also updated the executive summary. So I've added a new section in the report for supply chain. It's automatically updated my executive summary. That's something that large language models are very, very good at doing, is summarization of data, summarization of content. So very, very quick demo. Hopefully that gives you kind of an insight into what the potential of this is in the context of finance. So back to you, Will.
That's great, Mark. Thank you very much. So I guess I just want to finish it off with, we've spoken a lot about AI. I know generative, some of the stuff is still coming, but there's a lot of stuff that's been delivered and how technology has transformed finance. Now, Eric, at Oracle, we like to drink our own champagnes. We use our own systems. I thought I'd just maybe not put you on the spot, hopefully, but if you can just talk about one or two benefits that you've achieved by using technology in
Absolutely.
finance.
So I won't read all of these to your point, but I'll just pick a couple of them. And I think the benefit of this, of course, is results matter clearly, right? So as you're thinking about doing this, it's all about, can we actually make an impact that's measured? And so this 26% faster financial planning processes, as well as the less than 10 days to close the books, that's been significant for us, right? We were spending a massive amount of time, like most companies, just closing the books. And so process standardization, use of the technology, use of AI has really been a huge benefit that I personally benefit from significantly. So much more fun to have a job where you're not spending so much time closing the books each month or each quarter. So that's one. I'd also say we haven't talked about it much, but I also support the supply chain business within Oracle. And so the improvements that we've seen there through a lot of this technology has been very, very significant. And I alluded to earlier some of the challenges with the COVID supply shocks to the system. And really having this in place was tremendously beneficial for us. Made my job in finance a lot easier because we had the right level of instrumentation. So all good stuff.
Fantastic, guys. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Eric. We've launched the last poll, so if the participants could answer the question, just to gauge kind of where they are in their journey of AI and ML.
Yeah, a lot of folks evaluating use cases. That totally makes sense. But also a fair number of people have not considered it yet. We're still in the early days of Gen AI, but so that's pretty consistent, I'd say. Waiting on AI innovations from our vendors. Yeah, there you go. That's 4% there. Makes sense.
Fantastic. Well, I know we've only got literally a minute or so left. So if there are any questions, please pop them in the chat. And we'll try and get to them. Otherwise, Eric, Mark, thank you so much for your participation, and thanks to Argyle for hosting us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, panel, for that excellent discussion. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. This concludes today's webinar, and I want to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you again to our partner at Oracle. Enjoy the rest of your day.